Hi everyone, welcome back to Family Medicine Notes and Stories. Today we'll talk about the 2025 hypertension guidelines, what's new, why it matters, and how it applies to us here in the Philippines. I'll go through the updates and also give comments from a family physician's perspective so you see how these recommendations translate into everyday practice. All right, let's start with one of the first changes you'll notice in the 2025 guideline under new terminology. So back in 2017, the guideline used the term hypertensive urgency. In the 2025 update, that's now changed to severe hypertension. Now, this might sound like a simple wording, but it's actually important. The term urgency often causes confusion, not just for patients, but even for some health workers. So severe hypertension is much clearer and it's a lot easier to explain during consultation. So when I tell a patient they have severe hypertension, they immediately understand that it's serious and it needs attention without having to explain medical jargon like urgency. Now let's look at one of the new recommendations under secondary forms of hypertension. Back in 2017 guideline, there was no clear recommendation here, but in the 2025 update, we now have this class 1 recommendation. In adults with resistant hypertension, it's recommended to screen for primary aldosteronism. So even if the potassium levels are normal, the goal here is to improve detection, diagnosis, and make sure patients get the right targeted therapy. Persistent hypertension is something we see in the clinic, and sometimes it's easy to miss the underlying causes. Having a clear recommendation to screen for primary aldosteronism, even without hypokalemia, reminds us not to stop at just adjusting the medications, but to look for treatable secondary causes. Another new recommendation is under the primary aldosteronism. In the 2017 guideline, there was nothing specific here, but in the 2025 update, we now see this class 1 recommendation. For adults who need screening for primary aldosteronism, it's recommended to continue most antihypertensive medications except for MRAS, AS, or mineralocorticoid receptor antagonists before the initial screening. So the idea is to reduce the barriers and avoid delays in getting the patients tested. So before, we sometimes held off on meds, thinking they might interfere with the test, which could delay the whole process. Now the guideline is clear. Continue the usual blood pressure medications, just not the MRE, so patients don't miss out on early diagnosis. Let's now move on to lifestyle and psychosocial approaches. This is a new recommendation in the 2025 guideline, Class 2A. For adults, whether or not they already have hypertension, potassium-based salt substitutes can be useful in preventing or treating high blood pressure. This is especially helpful for patients who had a lot of salt when cooking or flavoring food at home. But here's the caution, this isn't for everyone. Patients with chronic kidney disease or CKD or those taking medications that reduce potassium excretion need extra monitoring because their potassium levels can build up. So many of our patients cook their own food and use a lot of salt. Recommending potassium-based salt substitutes is a simple change that can make a big impact. but we also need to check their kidney function and medications before giving the go signal. Now let's talk about a revised recommendation on when to start the blood pressure medicines or the antihypertensives. So if you already have a heart disease or cardiac problem and your BP is 130 over 80 millimeter mercury or higher, the medicines are recommended to prevent another heart attack or stroke. If you don't have heart disease, but your 10-year risk of developing one is 10% or higher, the same rule applies. Start the medicines at 130 over 80 millimeter mercury or above. And here's the 2025 update. If you have diabetes, kidney disease, or at least a 7.5% risk based on the new Prevent calculator, you should also start the treatment once your BP hits 130 over 80 millimeter mercury. So this means that we're not just looking at the BP number anymore. No, we're looking at the whole patient, their risks, their comorbidities, so we can start treatment earlier for those who need stronger protection. The updated US guideline also now recommends the Prevent calculator, which estimates both the 10 and 30-year cardiovascular risk and even includes heart failure in the calculation. So I'll discuss this risk calculator briefly a little later, but here's the important part for us. In the Philippines, we don't use the Prevent calculator yet. We still rely on the ASCVD risk calculator or the WHO ISS charge. So Prevent is more comprehensive, but it hasn't been validated locally. Now let's move on to the revised recommendations for blood pressure treatment thresholds, especially in patients with diabetes. So first, in the 2017 guideline, if an adult had no history of heart disease and their 10-year ASCVD risk was below 10%, blood pressure medicines or the antihypertensives were started only if their BP was 140 over 90 millimeter mercury or higher. However, in the 2025 update, things are more refined. So for adults with no clinical CVD, ASCVD, and a 10-year risk below 7.5 using the Prevent calculator, medication should be started if their BP stays at 130 over 80 millimeter mercury or higher, even after 3 to 6 months of lifestyle changes. So the goal is to prevent organ damage early and to stop the BP from climbing higher. Now let's focus on diabetes. So the older guidelines said that in patients with diabetes and hypertension, an ACE inhibitor or an ARB may be considered if albuminuria is present. In the 2025 update, the wording is stronger. ACE inhibitors or ARBs are now recommended if their chronic kidney disease, defined as an eGFR below 60 or albuminuria of more than or equal to 30, and even with mild albuminuria, these drugs should be considered to help slow down the progression of a diabetic kidney disease. So many of our patients with diabetes also have early signs of kidney involvement, and sometimes that's picked up only in routine labs. So this update reminds us to be proactive. Don't wait until the kidneys are severely damaged. Start an ACE inhibitor or ARB earlier to protect them. So next is a revised recommendation on treating hypertension in patients with chronic kidney disease or CKD. In the earlier guidelines, advice was ACE inhibitors were considered reasonable for CKD patients with albuminuria. ARBs could be used if ACE inhibitors weren't tolerated. But in the 2025 update, the recommendation is stronger and clearer. So for adults with hypertension and CKD, defined as an EGFR below 60 plus albuminuria of 30 or higher, use of a RAAS inhibitor, that's either an ACE inhibitor or an ARB, but not both together, is recommended. The goal is to lower the cardiovascular risk and slow down kidney damage. So this matters a lot in the clinic. So many of our patients with diabetes or long-standing hypertension also have early kidney involvement. So this update makes it clear that as soon as we see CKD with albuminuria, an ACE inhibitor or ARB should be part of the treatment plan unless there's a contraindication. So it's not just about controlling the BP, it's about protecting the kidneys and preventing future complications. Now let's look at a new recommendation for patients with acute intracerebral hemorrhage or ICH. There was no guideline on this in the 2017, but in the 2025 update, we have this. So for adults with acute spontaneous ICH who come in with a systolic BP between 150 and 220, it can be helpful to lower the BP right away to between 130 and less than 140. So we have to keep it in that range for at least 7 days after the ICH to improve functional outcomes. But if the systolic BP drops below 130, we have to stop the antihypertensive medicines. So this is important in the emergency setting. So when we see patients with hemorrhagic stroke, there's always a question of how low we should go with the blood pressure control. This update gives us a clear target that we don't leave it high, but don't overcorrect it either. So we have to keep it in between 130 and 140. Let's continue with another revised recommendation for patients with acute intracerebral hemorrhage. So in the 2017 guideline, if a patient came in with a systolic BP of over 220, it was considered reasonable to use a continuous IV infusion and close monitoring to bring it down. In the 2025 update, the recommendation is more refined. So for adults with acute spontaneous ICH who need blood pressure lowering, the key is careful titration. The goal is a smooth, steady control, avoiding sudden peaks or big drops in the systolic BP because stable blood pressure control can improve functional outcomes. So in stroke care, it's not just about lowering the BP, it's how we lower it. So sudden fluctuations can worsen the outcomes. So the emphasis now is on steady, well-monitored control rather than aggressive swings. Next, let's look at the revised recommendation for acute ischemic stroke. In the older guideline, aggressive BP lowering right after stroke was sometimes considered, but the 2025 update makes it clear with a class 3 or harm recommendation that for patients with intracerebral hemorrhage presenting within 6 hours, if the systolic BP is between 150 and 220, immediately dropping it below 140 is not helpful and may actually be harmful because it doesn't reduce death or severe disability. So similarly, for patients with acute ischemic stroke who undergo successful reperfusion therapy for large vessel occlusion, bringing the BP below 140 in the first 24 to 72 hours after reperfusion can worsen long-term outcomes. So, in stroke care, faster isn't always better when it comes to lowering BP. Overcorrecting too soon can actually harm the brain when it's trying to recover blood flow. So the key is controlled, cautious management rather than aiming for very low numbers right away. Now let's talk about the revised recommendation on hypertension and cognitive health. In the over guideline, the advice was for adults with hypertension, lowering blood pressure was considered reasonable to help prevent dementia or cognitive decline. But in the 2025 update, the recommendation is stronger that for adults with hypertension, the goal now is to keep the systolic BP below 130 because this is shown to be helpful or to help prevent mild cognitive impairment and dementia. So this is a very practical point when counseling patients. Many people are worried about stroke and heart disease, but not everyone realizes that high blood pressure also affects the brain long term. Being able to tell a patient that controlling their BP can help preserve memory and prevent dementia often makes them more motivated to stick with lifestyle changes and medication. Next, let's look at a new recommendation on hypertension in pregnancy. There was no clear guideline on this in the 2017, but in the 2025 update, it's very specific that if a pregnant patient has a systolic BP of 160 or higher, or a diastolic BP of 110 or higher, confirmed within 15 minutes, they should receive antihypertensive treatment. The goal is to bring the BP down to below 160 over 110 millimeter mercury within 30 to 60 minutes to prevent serious complications. Severe hypertension in pregnancy can quickly lead to emergencies like stroke, eclampsia, or organ damage. So, having a clear, targeted, and time frame helps us act fast and prevent both maternal and fetal complications. Now, another new recommendation in the 2025 guideline is about chronic hypertension in pregnancy. So, this refers to women who already had high blood pressure before pregnancy, or those with readings of 140 to 159 systolic or 90 to 109 diastolic before 20 weeks of gestation. For these patients, antihypertensive therapy is now recommended to bring BP back or to bring the BP to below 140 over 90. The goal is to reduce both maternal risk like stroke or preeclampsia and perinatal risk like preterm birth or growth restriction. So before, we were often more cautious and sometimes waited to treat unless BP was very high. So now the recommendation is clear. Treat earlier, target less than 140 over 90 millimeter mercury, and protect both the mother and the baby. Another new recommendation in the 2025 guideline focuses on pregnancy and hypertension. So for individuals with hypertension who are planning to get pregnant or who are already pregnant, the guideline now recommends counseling about the use of low dose aspirin. So the goal is to reduce the risk of preeclampsia and its complications, which can be dangerous for both mother and baby. Low-dose aspirin is safe, accessible, and now has a clear preventive role in high-risk pregnancies. So this makes it an important part of preconception and prenatal counseling for women with hypertension. Now, an important revised recommendation for women with hypertension who are pregnant or planning to get pregnant is to The guideline is very clear. Some blood pressure medicines should not be used because they can cause serious harm to the baby. Specifically, ACE inhibitors, ARBs, direct renin inhibitors, nitroprusside, MRAs, and atenolol are all contraindicated during pregnancy. Using these drugs can lead to fetal complications, so they should be avoided entirely. So, as physicians, family physicians, we need to review a patient's medication list before pregnancy and switch them to safer alternatives to prevent unintentional harm. Next, let's move to a new recommendation on resistant hypertension. So, for adults with resistant hypertension, the guideline now gives a class 1 recommendation to do a more detailed evaluation for secondary causes. So, this means carefully reviewing all the medications the patient is taking and removing those that can interfere with blood pressure control. So, the goal is to help lower BP more effectively and simplify the treatment. So sometimes resistant hypertension isn't because the patient needs more drugs. So it's because something else is driving the high BP, like an underlying condition or even common meds such as NSAIDs. So this update reminds us to step back and look for the root causes, not just keeping adding pills. Another new recommendation in the 2025 guideline deals with the renal denervation or RDN for resistant hypertension. So it now states that all patients being considered for RDN should be first evaluated by a multidisciplinary team. This means specialists who have expertise both in resistant hypertension and in the procedure itself. So the idea is to make sure the patients are properly assessed and that RDN is really the right option for them. It's not just about high blood pressure, it often involves multiple comorbidities, lifestyle factors, and sometimes medication issues. So having a team approach ensures the patient gets the safest and the most appropriate care. So the guideline also adds a new recommendation for patients being considered for renal renervation. It says that before going through with the procedure, there should be a clear shared decision-making process and that the patient should be counseled on both the potential benefits of lowering the blood pressure and the possible risks of the procedure compared with just continuing the medical therapy. And finally, let's talk about a new recommendation for hypertensive emergencies and severe hypertension. So specifically in patients who are not pregnant and not having a stroke. So for adults with severe hypertension who are hospitalized for non-cardiac conditions but don't have the signs of acute target organ damage, the guideline gives a class 3 harm recommendation. That means we should not give intermittent IV or oral antihypertensives just to bring the BP down quickly. So doing so can be harmful since a sudden drop can compromise the blood flow to vital organs. So sometimes we see very high numbers in the hospital or clinics, and the instinct is to fix it fast. But if there's no evidence of organ damage, the better approach is to adjust the maintenance therapy gradually rather than rushing it with IV or PRN meds. So now that we've finished the 2025 hypertension guidelines, let's connect it to something very practical. So the risk calculators. When you see a patient with elevated blood pressure, the next step isn't just writing a prescription. It's asking how high is this patient's actual cardiovascular risk. So that's where the tools like ASCVD risk estimator and the new AHA prevent calculator come in. So let's open the MD and compare the two. So the ASCVD calculator is the classic one. It estimates a patient's 10-year risk of heart attack or stroke using cholesterol, blood pressure, diabetes, smoking, and even race. That's why it became the standard in past guidelines, and here in the Philippines, it's still the one mentioned in our dyslipidemia and hypertension CPGs. But here's the catch, ASCVD has some limitations. It only gives a 10-year risk for ages 40 to 79. So for younger patients, you only get lifetime risk, not a 30-year estimate. Also, it requires you to pick a race category. So for Filipinos, we usually fall under the white or other, but that's not very precise. So it doesn't estimate the risk of heart failure, which is a big issue we're now seeing more in primary care. So that's why, the prevent is preferred. So that's why the prevent or the predicting risk of cardiovascular disease events calculator is preferred. It is the updated model from the American Heart Association. It works for adults as young as 30 and gives both 10-year and 30-year risk estimates so you can counsel younger patients better. So it's a race-free, avoiding the problem of inaccurate risk estimates in Asian populations and includes heart failure along with ASCVD events, which makes it more comprehensive. And it also incorporates measures like BMI and kidney function, making it a better reflection of a patient's overall cardiometabolic health. So if you ask me which one is better, Prevent is the more advanced, more inclusive tool. It's designed to fix many of ASCVD's weaknesses. The only reason we still use ASCVD a lot in the Philippines is because our current local guidelines haven't updated yet. But looking ahead, expect that Prevent will slowly take over because it aligns more with how we actually see patients, younger, more diverse, and with a broader cardiometabolic risk beyond just stroke and heart attack. All right, let's quickly run through this slide from the American Heart Association. So this one shows the definition and classification of blood pressure. So we have the three main categories: normal, elevated, stage 1 hypertension, and stage 2 hypertension. So it's pretty straightforward table. But what's important is that in adults, the blood pressure should always be categorized as normal, elevated, stage 1 or stage 2. That way we don't miss those early elevations that could progress to hypertension. So now speaking as a family physician, this is something I see every single day in the clinic. So most patients don't really come in because they feel their blood pressure is high. It's actually usually found on routine checks. So that's why we emphasize screening and prevention. So even if your blood pressure is just in the elevated range, lifestyle changes can make a huge difference before it progresses to a full-blown hypertension. So now that we've seen how blood pressure is classified, the next important question is how do we make sure those numbers we're using are actually accurate? So because in family medicine, I often see patients get worried about a single high reading, but sometimes it's not the patient, it's the way the blood pressure was taken. So that's why the new guideline emphasizes the best practices in measuring BP inside the clinic. So according to the guideline, here's what we should be doing in the clinic. First, make sure the patient avoids caffeine, exercise, or smoking at least 30 minutes before. Have them seated comfortably, back supported, feet flat on the floor, and arms supported at heart level. Use the correct cuff size on the bare arm. Too small or too large a cuff will give inaccurate results. The patient should stay quiet, no talking or using the phone during measurement. We need to take at least two readings, 1 minute apart, and record the average. And ideally, the room should be quiet and temperature controlled. So as family physicians, this is something we can reinforce in our daily practice. Sometimes patients come in saying, Doc, mataas po ang BP ko kagabi. But when you ask, they check it right after drinking coffee or while rushing. So reminding them about proper technique helps us avoid unnecessary worry or overtreatment. After getting the accurate BP readings, the next step is lab work. After getting accurate BP readings, the next step is lab work. So hypertension isn't just numbers. We need baseline tests to correct for complications and possible secondary causes. So this slide shows the essential labs and diagnostics recommended. From here, I'll just run through the rest of the slides quickly. So the main point of this video is really to emphasize what's new in the latest HA guideline compared to the previous one. So that's it for the highlights of the new HA hypertension guideline. As a family medicine specialist, my main takeaway is that it's not just about knowing the numbers, but making sure we measure the BP right, catch the risk early, and guide our patients in ways they can actually follow day to day. So if you want the full details, you can always check the HA website. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like more family medicine notes and stories, don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next video.